Welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. This is a safe space where we invite healthcare providers to unapologetically be themselves after the working day. My name is Jennifer George, and each week I will connect you with guests and stories that will help transform your stress to success and fulfillment. Are you with me? Grab your drink of choice and let's chat. Hey everyone, welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. I'm your host, Jennifer George, and I'm joining you this afternoon to chat with you a little bit about advocacy and complaining. You know, in healthcare as providers, we are advocates. We are advocates of our patients and we are advocates of providers and what we do and what healthcare means through and through. The problem is sometimes we don't voice our advocacy. We might perform it quietly. We might practice it quietly. We might embody it, but we're not too loud about it. And I'm not saying that you need to be super loud in order to create change, but I will say that a lot of people fear how they may look or appear, or they might fear retribution in some way from others, that they won't step out and rise up and advocate for what they believe is the greater good of all. And that can put you in a very uncertain state, right, of who you are and what you believe in, because you're being clouded by other people's judgments, perhaps, or your perception of their judgments. And that's a whole other podcast, right, is the narratives we are telling ourselves. So I want to chat with you first a little bit about what the differences between advocacy and complaining are. And maybe this might help you to step into that role a little more proudly and a little more loudly, if that's what it is that you actually want and are just holding yourself back from it. So first of all, complaining tends to be more emotionally driven. So you're venting about something, you might be upset, feel betrayed, you might be afraid of something, and you're venting it. Whereas advocacy is a little more cause driven. Okay, so it's got more clarity to it in the sense that you're working towards a bigger picture. Second, complaining is more short term. So you vent, you say what it is that's on your mind, and then you're done with it. Whereas advocacy doesn't stop at just the event. It's looking at a longer game. It's looking at a long-term change in picture. Complaining often results in nothing changing at all, rather than you just expending energy. It doesn't promote any change. While the ideas through complaining might be great, if you're doing nothing with them, it's just complaining at the end of the day. Whereas advocacy is initiating change in some way, in some small incremental way, it's initiating change. So whether it's speaking to the powers that be, or whether it's having a petition start, or it's a post on social media, whatever it might be, it's initiating and taking the practice of doing that to initiate some sort of change. Complaining is often negatively driven, right? Like I mentioned earlier. So the emotions sometimes that bring that about are more negative in nature. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but to do that and then to complain and then feel further disempowered by that might feel uncomfortable for us, right? Might not be a place that we want to stay in all the time. Whereas advocacy is more positively driven, right? There's a greater good that you're promoting here and that you're looking out for. And by doing this, you are feeling more empowered by it. Even though it is long, even though it is tiring, you're feeling empowered by it. Whereas complaining, you might be exhausted by the energy you're expending in doing so. The other major thing I would say that the difference is between advocacy and complaining is that advocacy is more solutions oriented, right? So we're looking for a solution rather than just complaining about what is. Okay, so we understand what is, we're trying to understand what is, but then we want to share how we can improve the system, let's say, or the practice for everyone involved. Whereas complaining is more just expressing what's wrong, but not really coming up with any ideas to solve the situation. So it's a really fine line, right? It's a tight balance between the two, because advocacy, like I said, it's a longer game. It's a lot more of a commitment on your part So you want to be sure that what you're advocating for is really what you stand for. Whereas complaining, there's no long-term intention in sight there. And I'm not saying that complaining can't turn into advocacy. I think sometimes that the more you complain about something and nothing gets done, then maybe you're probably going to be finally the person to say, I'm going to do something about this. And then you might find yourself more in an advocacy transition or situation, which isn't a bad thing either. I would say that almost advocacy also comes from an emotional place too. It just doesn't stay there, right? Because advocacy is trying to promote a long-term change. So if we stay consumed by emotion and emotion alone, especially if it's negative emotion alone, then we might find ourselves unable to think more clearly and to support others and acquire other collective voices in advocating for the same purpose. So let me know what you think. I think advocacy is so important. I think that we don't do it enough. And I think that many healthcare providers I know are and can be amazing advocates, but are held back for their own personal reasons. And that's totally fine if that's where you want to be. But I hope that this podcast just gives you a little bit more insight into the fact that if you're an advocate and you're practicing that, to not feel guilty for doing that in any way, shape, or form. Because basically what you're saying is, as an advocate, you're saying that we both want the same thing here, right? We both want the same common goal, but my method might be a little different than your method. And this is what I would propose. Advocacy is having the courage to have that open dialogue and not be so shut down like complaining is. And I've had to walk this fine line many times as a caregiver and as a professional in my career, but also in my journey with caregiving with my dad. And I think the two kind of related to each other in a lot of ways because I was on both sides of the system. So it's always still something I have to check in with for myself because I know I've been on both sides of complaining and advocating. But I really think that what it comes down to is the greater good, and that advocacy is rooted from a good place. And it's just wanting what's fair, what's just. And like I said, what could be a better way to maybe outdated or older methods that are not serving the greater purpose, the greater vision, the greater picture, or it's not serving the current system in what is now an ever-changing world right now. So let me know what you think. If you like this podcast, please take a screenshot, tag me on Instagram. My handle's @bestobsessedwithjen. If you would kindly review this podcast, I really appreciate it. We've hit the top 10% now on listen notes, and I would love to further improve that if possible. And I can't do it without your advocacy and without your sharing and reviews. So thank you so much for all you're doing right now, all you're standing up for, all you're embodying in your practice. And I encourage you to continue doing so, even if you're the only one who sees it and hears yourself. And until we chat next time, remember to stay well and stay happy. So if you guys like this podcast, please subscribe and leave an honest review. Your feedback means everything to me. Your reviews are what moves this podcast forward, and I always appreciate receiving them. If you want to get a hold of me directly, reach out to me on social media. My handles are in the show notes, and you can always subscribe to my weekly newsletters at jennifergeorge.co so that we can stay connected. So until next time, thank you guys so much again for your ongoing support.